Hey folks, David Stewart here. It's maybe Fiction Friday. Sorry to disappoint some of you, but we're going to talk about Twilight again, specifically character exposition, how the characters are exposed and described and fully revealed to you throughout the course of the book. This is for those of you who are writing young adult fiction or who are just interested in understanding how young adult fiction is actually executed and why it's executed in the way it is. I think the way that the character exposition is executed in the book has a lot to do with how people are able to easily get into it, understand it, and identify and like the characters. There are two kinds of character exposition going on in this particular book. One is centered on the primary character, the main character, Bella Swan. That's done a little bit indirectly, even though it's in first-person perspective. As she reacts and goes through the actual story, you get more and more revelations about her character. And this is, by its very nature, a self-reflective kind of exposition. This is her talking about herself. So the book actually opens up with her describing herself and pointing out an insecurity over a physical flaw. That flaw is pale skin, but of course, pale skin is not actually a flaw. Like your skin tone, whether it's dark or light, is not a beautiful or not beautiful thing. What makes beauty is the sum total of the way all the traits work, not just the fact that you have pale skin and dark hair. That can be very beautiful. But what matters is that the character feels insecure about it. Because the exposition of Bella is reflective, it's done in the first person, this allows the readers, and specifically the readers for the target demographic, which are going to be teenage girls primarily, to immediately identify with the main character, like the main character, and be able to view themselves a bit as an insert with that main character. Usually you see this with everyman type characters, and Bella Swan kind of starts off as an everyman with the way that she's exposed. She doesn't have particular strengths or weaknesses that are shown right away, but she does show an insecurity, and you have to think that teenage girls that are going to be reading Twilight, they're going to have a lot of insecurities about their physical appearance. It comes with growing up, and it comes especially with being a teenager and figuring out who you are and not being able to accept whatever God gave you in terms of your physical arrangement of your face and all that. Now, the other half of the exposition has to do with how you view the main love interest, which is Edward Cullen. And this is done through a couple of different techniques that I think really function well to make this book have the interest it has as you're reading it, which is Edward Cullen is described right away as having multiple traits, some of which are beautiful, some of which are not, but he's described directly as being beautiful, and he's also distant and cold. He looks cold, he's pale, he acts cold towards Bella Swan. So right away, even though she's, quote, off-put by him, she's not immediately understanding of him, she does find him beautiful, whatever that means to the reader. Because he's distant, he actually takes on a bit of an interest. He's a mystery, and one of the things that people like in books is to unravel mysteries, and mysteries about characters that are interesting are the best kind. Through a slow series of events, she slowly and carefully reveals more and more of Edward Cullen's personality. So one of the first things is that he sits next to her in a science class and is completely cold toward her. This is kind of like negging, right? And there's actually multiple cases of negging in these books, which is where it's something pickup artists do to try to manipulate the emotions of women. They say something negative about them, which puts the woman off their guard and makes the woman feel that she's lucky to be talking to the man and things like that. There's several cases of that. So one of the things that happens is he's completely cold toward her, and she's really worried about that. She doesn't know what she did to upset him. She doesn't know why he doesn't like her. It makes her feel even more inferior. It makes her feel even more out of place. Of course, with the story, she's a bit of a fish out of water. Then later, she sees him trying to change his schedule in the office, and he just walks away from her as soon as he sees her. Again, he gives her the cold shoulder. Then we have a conflicting message when during the science class, people are going to be testing their blood. Nowadays, people wouldn't really test blood, but this is actually something that we used to do like back in the 90s. Like AP Bio is like you could prick your blood and you could test clotting rate. You could do all kinds of different things like that. And it wasn't thought of as too weird a thing even in public school. No, I think that's changed. But she gets faint because of the blood, and he physically carries her to the nurse's office. Now, this is an interesting moment because it reveals something interesting about Edward, which is that he's physically very strong, even though he doesn't look strong. There's a vampire who's very svelte, one who's very buff, and then there's Edward, who's kind of in the middle, but of course is intended to be whatever the reader finds the most attractive, whatever body type for a male the reader's going to find the most attractive. But he shows that he's physically strong. Obviously, physical strength is a characteristic that women find attractive. It represents a whole bunch of different things with the masculine side of things, including, protection, which also goes with potential for violence and things like that. So you get this revelation, but not only is that conflicting, not only do you have that revelation, you have a conflicting message because he does something which is caring for her. And then he starts to know her a little bit more. Then you have the situation where he saves her, and you have another little slow revelation of what's going on. He physically saves her in a way that would be impossible. He pulls her out of a car careening through the ice and saves her life. And as a result, you know something is up with him. This isn't a human being. It was impossible for him to move that way. Now we're unraveling the mystery of Edward Cullen. And then we slowly begin to figure out that Edward is acting cold towards her, not because he dislikes her, but because he's intensely interested in her, which is a bit of a fantasy reversal. We're really interested in him because he's aloof, he's above us, if we're thinking from the female perspective. And then when that turns and he's interested in us, it's very invigorating as well. But what goes along with that is a little bit of negging over what Stephanie Meyer decided was going to be Bella's main flaw, which is her clumsiness, that she falls down a lot. She's clumsy. Now, clumsiness is kind of a character flaw, but it's not a moral flaw. It's just, okay, you're not very physically able to control your body the way an athlete would. It's kind of an interesting choice for this, and actually has some story impacts, I think, in the later books. But it's interesting the way that those two are revealed. Likewise, each of these two characters are exposed in the context of groups. So Bella Swan, when she arrives at this Seattle town, she ends up making some friends. And the friends include two boys who are clearly both interested in her. Now, following up this belief that she's plain and boring, you have two boys that are interested in her and competing over her a little bit. This is a bit of a female fantasy, and it doesn't quite jive with how the character feels about herself. Nevertheless, she's not interested in them because they're just not interesting compared to the main character that's interesting, which is Edward Cullen. And then you also have some very basic conflict with one of the girls likes one of the boys. I think Jessica likes Mike or something. And so that creates friction with her. So you have this contrast between this plain group dynamic, which is very much like a teenage interest dynamic. There's a little love triangle to begin the story. And then you have this conflict then you have it compared to the gang on the other side. So you have the Normie gang, which is going to be the friends that she meets at the beginning of the book. Then you have the elite gang, which are the elite, aloof and elite vampires, which are so beautiful. They sit by themselves at lunch and stare off into space. And they're too beautiful. Nobody will talk to them. They don't talk to anybody. They're too special. So as she gets closer to Edward, she also comes into contact with this elite gang, and each of them is far more interesting than the normal banal kind of friends that she makes at the beginning. And so the contrast between these two is really effective in showing off what Bella's interested in, what the reader's really interested in, which are these vampires. And so as you start to learn the backstory of the vampires, each of those is exposed through stories of Edward and some other his father. As she meets him, they expose the backstories of these different vampires, and of course they're far more interesting than any 16-year-old boy is going to be. If you're a 100 or something year old vampire, there's a lot more experience there. You also have the lore, the interest of the lore that kind of cues into that. So all of these things work together to show you indirectly the character traits of the two main characters, and also give you a taste through contrast of the elite vampire gang as well as the banal gang. And then you have one more little monkey wrench thrown in, which is you have the introduction of a younger character named Jacob, who's intended to be somewhere else in the spectrum, and he doesn't really come into play until the second book. So anyway, that's the character exposition of Twilight. You can actually adapt this and put this into lots of different settings with lots of different characters. Whenever you have a character that wants to move from the basic and the boring and oppressive over into the fantastical, you can have a contrast between the elite gang and the normal gang, the popular kids that are too special to talk to, and then the normal kids that everybody's like, they're weird, you know. So you can do that in any kind of thing where there's multiple social groups. It doesn't have to just be teenage drama. It could be, you could do it with science fiction. You could do it with a business setting or something like that. There's lots of different places where you can put those two things together. And likewise, you can slowly reveal a very interesting character by showing off one at a time very attractive traits. So if you imagine that you have a male character, you can show off the main traits that you want to be viewed as attractive, which is going to be, you know, wealth, strength, power, and also what's another thing that has to do with the relation to the female, which is going to be like a protector mentality, a compassion mentality towards the female, those sorts of things. So the combination of potential violence along with like caring towards the female, those are the things which you're going to want to develop through a romance, and that's exactly what they do in this book, and that's why I think a lot of teenage girls really like it. So thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Of course, you can buy my books on Amazon. They're not young adult books. They are in different parts of the spectrum, mostly fantasy books. Muramasa Blood Drinker, a samurai fiction novel. That one's good. The latest one is called Voices of the Void. It's sci-fi horror, and you can get it for 99 cents on Amazon. Link is down below in the description, or you can buy the paperback as well. So have a great one, and I'll see you guys next time.